Hi, and welcome. You are watching Financial Foundations right now, and this is the session on savings. My name is Shannon Acosta. I am a CFP and advisor with Benchmark, and Hall's with me today. Hall, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name Hall Ballinger. Glad to be with y'all. Thanks for tuning in. Another advisor with Benchmark, and we're a team of right now 4 advisors, and we're just here to help with all the educational needs you have, and hopefully you get something beneficial out of this content today.
Well, we are really thrilled that you're here. Just by way of quick introduction, we're going to try and keep this as quick and concise for you as possible. If you hear us say something and you don't feel like we went into enough detail, please reach out to us. You'll get our emails along with Sarah Beach's email at the end of all of this. And so you can contact us if you have any questions. And I want to make a quick distinction between the kind of savings that we'll be talking about today and retirement savings investment wise. We are not talking about investing retirement savings. We are talking about cash that you keep in the bank for emergencies. And so if you're planning on talking about retirement savings, we do have a course for you, but that is not this one. So feel free to stick around if you want, but we don't want to waste your time or have you be disappointed if we don't go down the path that you were expecting. Hall, would you kind of go through to kick us off? How much should we have in savings?
Yeah, this is a great question. One of the most common questions we get when people come into the office or via Zoom. But first of all, in terms of just your natural savings, there's again, in this subset, 2 different distinctions. There's your emergency fund, and then there's non emergency but planned expenses down the road. For the emergency fund, we normally encourage and recommend anywhere between 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses. So if you're spending $2,000 a month, that would be $6,000 to $12,000. And then some people say, well, which one is it? Is it 3 or 6 months? It's largely a personal decision when it comes to that level and taking into account all of your different scenarios that you have going on. If you're single, strong income, and you feel very good about your job, not securement, but job security, then we'd say, you know what, 3 months is probably what's going to be encouraged for you at that moment. And if something happens to that job or you need to replace that income, within 3 months, you should be able to replace that one way or another. If you're married with 2 or 3 kids and you're a one income family, then leaning more towards that 6 month level in that emergency fund would probably be more prudent. So again, this also comes with level of risk and being able to sleep at night. So if you're married and one partner says, I want it at 15,000 and you're saying, oh, I want it at 10,000. Normally we encourage people to compromise and go to 15,000. We don't want people losing sleep over the amount that is not in their savings, and no one's ever been mad about having too much into savings. We do want to encourage, though, setting a firm limit on what that emergency fund is, because any dollar over and above that amount can go to work for you harder somewhere else. The other type of savings, the non-emergency, this is what you tuck away for future known expenses like a car, vacation, annual taxes coming through, just making sure that those are accounted for and being planned for. We'll touch on that down the road as well. Something else we also get asked a lot is there a certain percentage we should be saving for our expenses? We are pretty firm and encourage 15% being saved for retirement. But again, this is separate from retirement savings. Regarding savings from either if it's for your emergency fund or for those designated expenses down the road, it's going to be a largely personal discussion with either you and your spouse or with us or whoever your accountability partner is there in determining what it is that you're wanting to save for and how far in the future do we need to save for it. So you see a lot of people do, well, we're going to live off one spouse's income and not the other. That's great. And again, we don't want to discourage that, but we really do want to encourage being intentional. So if you could do your spouse's income plus $100 a month, that's what we'd encourage over and above. We want you ultimately to be aware of what you're spending and what you're able to save, and that making sure that it's a priority. We recommend doing this by building your budget, not by choosing an arbitrary percentage. Your budget is the ultimate king when it comes to helping you determine what's best for your savings down the road. So if you have a good income, but your expenses are too high, then maybe you need to back off on those expense numbers. Vice versa, you have your income isn't as good, but your expenses are high. Well, maybe you need to work to see how can we increase that income to work and allow us to build more into that savings or whatever it is you are working towards down the goal. We've even seen people save over half their personal income, not only to go into savings, but also to get out of baby step 2, getting out of the debt, and then going on towards saving for the future. Shannon, if we did have emergencies keep eating up our emergency fund, what do I do then?
Sure, this is a great question. And I have been here. It's incredibly frustrating to feel like you're making progress on building savings up and then have something come along that takes the wind out of your sails and reverses some of the money you just put into your emergency fund. And when clients ask this question, that we want to first ask, make sure that they are truly emergencies. Whatever you're finding yourself dipping into savings for, make sure it's really an emergency. And this is where I come, there's a risk here of me coming off as a little bit judgmental, and I do not mean that in the slightest. The only thing I'm wondering about, and I have to look at myself in the mirror as I'm doing this too, is are you really having an emergency come up that you didn't expect? Or is it maybe just that you haven't accounted for all of the expenses in your budget the way that you could have in order to keep savings at the appropriate level? And by that, I mean, well, I can give you an example. My daughter started school a couple of years ago, and the fees, like the book fees, uniform dues, all of the stuff that we weren't really expecting really piled up, and we found ourselves having to go into our emergency savings to cover these. And it wasn't that her needing books, by the way, she can't read, not quite sure what a book fee is for if you can't read, but instead of having to go in and consider a book fee as an emergency, what we could have done and what we did do going forward was just account for that in our monthly budgeting. So it was there for us when we got there. So again, we love you a lot. There's no judgment here, but really analyze whether or not what you're having to go into your emergency fund for truly fits the definition of an emergency. Common examples are loss of a job, unexpected medical procedure, unexpected car repair, or unexpected home repair, like a new roof or a new furnace. Those are completely valid. And I will just say, by way of encouragement, when it rains, it pours. You will probably feel like you go through a season where when one of these emergencies arise, all of them happen at once, but there is always a light at the end of the tunnel. So hang in there. If you are really in one of these seasons where you're just having bad luck, it's not going to last forever. But what I want you to do sincerely is pat yourself on the back, because if you are one of the rare Americans who had emergency savings to dip into for one of these emergencies, then that's something to celebrate. You're in the extreme minority of people who are able to cover these expenses. And, research as recent as 2020 suggests that only 41% of Americans have enough in savings to cover a $1,000 unexpected emergency. $1,000. And if you fall in that category, we are here with you, and we really want to do everything we can to make sure that you put yourself in a position to be sleeping better at night. So, our goal is that the other 49% of the population are listening to this and don't feel alone and don't feel ashamed by that. But if you're part of the 41%, then you've really prepared in a way that sets you apart. So as frustrating as it is to have to dip into your emergency fund, it's also, we consider it a victory. If you do fall in that 49%, then you might find yourself taking out credit card loans or taking out a home equity loan or some kind of small personal loan. So that is not the way that we want to go. If you find yourself continually facing emergencies, you might find the temptation to just charge it next time. We would really encourage against that. And then finally, pause, take a deep breath, and just keep working. Build your emergency fund back up, because it really will, at some point, the rainy season will be over. We're here to encourage you through that. Another question that we get asked a lot as far as the emergency fund is, where should we keep it? Any emergency fund or other savings, should we invest those, or should we keep those in the bank? And well, question for any of you watching this or with us right now, I want to know if you know what the current interest rate is on your own bank account. I heard from somebody in a class last year who earned 8 pennies on $9,000 that they had in savings with one local commercial bank. That was over the course of a year, by the way. According to the FDIC, the average savings account rate is 0.09%, and sometimes it's even less at bigger, larger retail banks. You're going to typically find lower interest rates at brick and mortar institutions. Someplace where you can walk in and speak to a teller and transact business in person. If you're comfortable with online banks, then you might consider a bank like Ally or Marcus by Goldman Sachs. We'll send you the links to both of these in the notes and follow-up email. You're not going to have access to any physical branches, but I can attest to their customer service. You will have access to free ATM withdrawals, and you're going to have a visibility through an online app, something mobile. So let's say that you have a $25,000 emergency fund and you're in one of these brick and mortar institutions that has a low interest rate, let's say 0.01%. You will earn $2.50 throughout the course of a year on that, on your emergency fund savings. So keep that number in mind for just a moment. And like these Marcus and Ally banks I just mentioned to you, the rates will fluctuate depending on what the Fed rates are doing. And we've seen them be as high as 2.25%. And I've seen them personally be as low as 0.4%, which is still significantly higher than some of these other local banks that we've quoted you at. So let's just say that you're landing at a bank and right now the interest rate is 1%. And that same $25,000 emergency fund, rather than earning $2.50 over the course of the year, a 1% interest rate will get you $250. So, it's not the point of the emergency fund, but if it's just sitting there anyway, you might as well be letting it work for you just a tad if you're comfortable with the online concept. Most of our team use these options. There are other, and we're not affiliated with them, by the way. I just want to put that out there. They're not paying us to say that, but we've just gotten used to and accustomed to their service and what they can do. There are several banks that pop up from time to time, newer kind of startup ones. We found that we're just a little bit more comfortable with the Ally and Marcus because they have been around for many years. So they're a little more reliable. We trust their customer service, et cetera. So if you do start researching banks with higher interest rates, we just recommend that you choose something with some staying power and experience, not just going with the highest rate at the time. Hall, kind of moving forward, one question we get asked a lot is, we talked about emergency fund and we've talked about a couple of these other points that you picked up on in your first question, but big picture, what should you be saving for? What are some of those other categories?
Yeah, and I'm glad I can circle back around to this one. But the very first step in this is looking back over your expenses the past 12 months. Look and see, is there something that comes every year that always seems to find me out of sorts, always seems to having to charge it to a credit card or depleting my emergency fund? If that's the case, I hate to tell you this, but it's not an emergency. If it's coming every single year, Christmas is on December 25th every single year. So being able to save for that consistently throughout the year, we'd encourage that more so than just drawing from the emergency fund when it comes. You want to look for the things that could potentially send you back into debt if you didn't prepare for them ahead of time. We see people sometimes choose to do this with a vacation. They'll just say, "Oh, I'll charge it on the credit card." No, you're paying for the vacation, and normally it's like a 29% interest rate on those credit card loans, and they're just hoping you don't pay it back. Plan for those in advance. Look for other things that would just upend that budget, that your emergency fund. If you're having to pull from it, but you can expect it, put a plan in place to make sure you can pay for it in cash when it gets there and not have to touch the emergency fund. Some irregular expenses are hard to account for, like I know pets is a fun one. Our dog swallowed something the other day, and that was a fun pet bill. But my wife and I, and we use the same online banks that Shannon talks about as well. We have a fund that's a pet fund. And so we'll put in a set amount of money every single month just to be able to, when those vet bills do come up, oh, we have that pet fund. We can just pull straight from that, and we know that it's taken care of. Other things to possibly think about: vehicle replacement. It's an emergency if you get in a wreck and total your car, or your engine just happens to drop out of your car. It's not an emergency if your car has 350,000 miles on it and is 30 years old and you've been warned multiple times it's on its last leg. If that's the case, put a plan in place to buy a car in cash. Other things to think about: annual vehicle repairs, membership dues, clothing, birthdays, bills paid annually, taxes if you're self-employed, making sure you definitely want to have that accounted for, down payment on a house, things like that. Once you do save up for those, reimburse yourself. So when the bill comes, pay it out of your checking, or even if you do have to pay it out of your savings account at that moment, but move the funds that you had set aside for in that bucket directly to replace, whether it's your checking or emergency fund, or that if you took it directly from that fund, which is even better. This kind of leads us into the question, okay, so some of these I can normally just take care of and pay for them, either have a $50 a month every month to take care of it, but some are pretty big expenses. A down payment on a house, a new to me car, we'd encourage a gently used car. How do we save for those bigger expenses that's going to be harder than $50 a month? So this is just really just simple, breaks down to a simple math problem of, hey, you are planning to take an $800 vacation in 10 months. Create a vacation account and save $80 a month. If you're taking an $8,000 vacation in 10 months, save $800 a month. We just want to inform you and equip you to be prepared to pay for that in cash, to where you never have to see debt ever again. We want to keep the interest working for you and your savings account and not for the debt collectors. Other things to prepare for: if you need $10,000 for a car in 2 years. So this one's a little bit more complicated, but let's say you have a fairly used car and the value, you can get a $4,000 trade-in value for the car you currently have. Let's add another $1,000 just for taxes and fees and expenses of buying a new car. So that means overall, car's $10,000, $4,000 for your current vehicle, add another $1,000 for the fees. You're going to have a $7,000 expense in 2 years. Just take 700, divide it by 24. You need to save $291.66 a month to get you to where you need to be. If that timeline needs to be sped up, just divide it by 12. Whatever you need to do, just make sure that you're planning for it. Other things to think about: if it's a down payment on a house, we always encourage, if you're saving for something that's less than 2 years in the future, don't risk that in the market. And Shannon's about to touch on this too, but make sure that's going to be there when you need it. For something a little bit longer term, maybe a down payment on a house in 5 years, something like that, that's when having the discussion with an advisor or with someone that can help lead you down and educate you about what that looks like if you were to invest it would make sense. Everyone's situation is different, and I by no means want to encourage you to invest if it's something longer than 2 years, but it is certainly a position to be able to have that conversation and make sure you're getting informed to the best that you can be. So Shannon, are there times when I should stop saving? What happens if an emergency happens and I got to deplete everything?
Yeah. Well, let's just say that you've been on this road for a long time, and to Hall's point, you have an emergency and you deplete everything, you build it back up, something else comes along, and it just seems like you're constantly on this track. And then finally you hit your emergency fund full. Can you dial it back a little bit? And I would say that, there is a time, but there's also not much, like if you're trying to maintain a healthy lifestyle. diet and exercise are always components that you need to pay attention to. They're not just something that you strive toward in one season of your life that covers you for good. But having said that, yes, you do need to take a break every now and then. And part of that is from vacations and other things that Hall mentioned. You can proactively plan for those breaks. But I would say that if your emergency fund is full, and if your additional savings for irregular or one-off expenses are covered, you don't find yourself having to dip into emergency fund to cover some of the one-off items that Hall mentioned earlier. If you still have money left over at the end of the month after that, then yeah, I think you're ready to stop saving, and I'll get into that in a second, and start investing and make the transition from putting your money under the mattress, so to speak, to putting it somewhere where it can work a little bit harder for you. But in general, should you ever stop spending less than you make? Should you ever stop putting your money toward a future goal? Not necessarily. Arguably, when you're retired and financially independent, that perspective shifts just a little bit. But for most of us, especially those who are still pursuing financial independence, then you really need to get into the mental habit that you're always going to be living beneath your means to some degree in order to overall meet your goals. But let's talk about investing for a second. I know I told you we wouldn't, but this is just a very brief caveat. And we get this question a lot for folks saying, couldn't my money work harder for me if I invested my emergency fund rather than putting it in a savings account? And yes, you can earn a much higher rate of return in investments over the course of the long run than you can in an emergency fund savings account, hands down, which is precisely why we don't recommend that you put your retirement savings in a bank. But the purpose of your emergency fund, quite frankly, is to be really boring. It's to not do anything. It's just to exist and to be there to help you sleep a little bit better at night. Emergencies happen when we least expect them. It's not something that we can predict the timing of. Markets aren't something that you can predict the timing of. So you have too many variables just from a statistical risk standpoint that are intersecting and probably not syncing up to be able to ensure confidently that the amount of money you have in your emergency fund, when you'll need it, will be worth as much as it was when you put it there to begin with. So I'll give you an example. I had a client one time who was duly employed prior to 2008, had a great job. And this person also was a veteran. So they qualified for the 0% down VA loan. And they didn't have money in a bank. They had their emergency fund invested. Well, the Great Recession of 2008 occurred. And unfortunately, a lot of the things that, when one bad economic domino falls, it tends to take a lot of the other ones with it. So not only did this person lose his job, his income was gone, but his emergency fund was cut in half just because that's what markets did at that point in time. And he had no equity in his home because the value of his home dropped as well. So that is an extreme example, but it's heartbreaking. And I think it happened in such a dramatic fashion, unfortunately, but it should serve as a cautionary tale. These major sort of economic hopes that we put our hope in at some point, they tend to all sort of respond the same way during economic recessions. All that to say, with a bank account, you're never going to wonder how much your money is going to be worth the next day. So it's got to be boring. Just make sure that it's something that cannot go down in value, and make sure it's something that you have access to and won't be penalized for if you need to withdraw it early. Some CDs charge you a penalty for taking it out before the maturity date. And of course, your 401k would charge you a penalty and taxes if you take money out of there for an emergency. So, long story short, don't try and get fancy with your emergency fund. Just let it sit there and be boring, and think of it as insurance, almost peace of mind insurance. And then, Hall, if I don't have money left over to save every month when my emergency fund is full, what do we do? How do we move on to retirement savings if we're already tapped out with our organic month-to-month savings?
Yeah, great question. I do want to touch on something that you were talking about before of the emergency fund. Think of it, if you're following along with especially Dave Ramsey's baby steps, steps 1, 2, and 3 are defensive. It's getting you in a financial situation to make sure that you're covered in case of a worst case scenario, to make sure you never go into debt again. So step 3 is getting the fully funded emergency fund. It's a defensive move. You're not going to be making money off of it. Steps 4, 5, 6, and 7 are when you start to be able to go onto the offensive side. And again, we'll have more classes on those coming in the future as well. But just to whet your appetite for what's coming. Back to the question, what if I don't have anything left over? We get this, and this is a kind of a trick question. If you don't plan, if you don't have a budget, more than likely you'll never have anything left over at the end of the month. It's gonna find a way to get spent, or you're gonna find something that catches your eye that you think it's gonna work harder for you somewhere else. It's gonna be out of your bank account. And so we are big advocates of pay yourself first. So after you pay the necessities, so housing, food, and this is not eating out 5 times a week, this is the necessary food to stay alive, and electricity and water. After you pay those main bills that allow you to live, then look to set your savings for you. Then after you do that, you can go on and make sure you have cable or entertainment or whatever else there is out there that that you want to enjoy. Those come after savings. So make sure that you're prioritizing savings above everything but the absolute life essentials. So that's going to be our encouragement. And again, we have budget coaches here that are happy to help take a look at those budgets and just make sure that everything's working as hard as it can be, or where you can cut back. You know what, maybe cable you don't use it as much anymore. You shouldn't be paying $50, $70, $80 a month for it. Well, let's get that out of your life. Let's make sure you can put those funds to work for you harder somewhere else. And we just want to give you a few tips just to improve the saving discipline. We know this is not second nature for a lot of people, including us. This is something we work on ourselves day in, day out as well. The key behind it is intentionality, and the key behind that is the budget. I promise you, every single one of us that work here has a budget that we work on, and it's not set it and forget it. It's something that we look at every single month. It is a chore. It is not fun, but it allows us to be in control of our funds, know where it's going, and it'll allow you to tell you where your money to go instead of wondering where it went. It is by far and away the biggest tool you can have for your financial future, whether you make $40,000 a month or a year or $400,000 a year. Regardless, a budget is the absolute must. The next thing is have a savings plan. If you know that car is going to be not running in 10 months, don't just wait to think about it in 10 months from now. Put a plan in place now to be prepared for it. As you go through these steps, you'll realize what you used to think were emergencies weren't really emergencies. Some were, but by and large, you can start planning for them and being more prepared and being able to sleep more soundly at night. And that's really our goal behind this. And then it'll allow you to save for those bigger goals that you have down the road. Other thing might be helpful, save any raises you get. If you get a raise, you've been living at this level for the last year, 2, 5, 10 years. If you get a raise, you can continue to live at this level. A lot of people will increase their level of living with their raises, and so they'll never actually realize the savings power of those raises because they'll say, oh, we can go out and celebrate. And we're not against celebrating, but we are against not being intentional with those funds. So if you get a raise, make sure you're taking it into account in the budget. The biggest absolute tip that I have, though, is save automatically. After you've sat down, looked at your budget, looked at the essentials, and determined, hey, we can save $200 a month, set it up automatically. This goes in line with paying yourself first. So it's going to force you're going to know that $200 draw every single month is coming. And it's not an option. It's something that's happening, and you have to plan around that, as opposed to trying to figure out where to find $200 at the end of the month for your savings plan. And then after all that, if it's still a burden, figure out what those hurdles are. What's causing you to not be able to move forward in this savings process? What's causing you to not have that emergency fund there? Or where are you losing the peace and the sleep at night? What is causing it? Drill down into it. If you're still having trouble overcoming that hurdle, reach out to us. We're happy to help. Again, either Shannon or I, any other advisor, or our budget coaches really want to look with you and help determine what's that stumbling block. Let's put a plan in place to get that out of your way so you can be on your way to getting that defense set and playing some offense in the future. Shannon, anything that you would add to that, or just overall takeaways?
One thing I would add is that if you have small children, or they don't have to be small. If you have kids and they live with you, you can use this as an opportunity to get them involved and engaged and teach them. You can make it visual. And even if you don't have kids, you just might appreciate this. There's something about visualizations and having something printed out that you can tactfully update that motivates you in a way that's that just your bank statement doesn't. And we've got some tools. We have some printouts that you can kind of like track your progress, if you will. We can send those to you, but I would encourage using something like that, and then celebrate the milestones that you meet. And to Hall's point earlier, we love celebrations. Just make sure it's within the realm of prudence and something that you've already planned for, and then get right back on track when the celebration's over so that you can quickly get to the next milestone. But, big picture, we've talked about a lot, and we've been talking for a little more than 30 minutes. So once again, if we have glazed over something that you want more information about, then contact any of us. We not only have budgeting coaches and financial coaches, but you have a team of advisors at Benchmark that can help you as well. So the big things, I'll try and summarize it down to 5. Make a written plan. What's written gets done. Free money is awesome. So take advantage of some of these online banks that pay slightly higher interest rates. Your emergency fund is insurance against Murphy's Law. It's supposed to be boring. Don't let it get too fancy. Ask for help. And then finally, identify your one thing. What is one thing you heard while we were talking that you thought, that could help. I think I want to implement that. And focus on that, because it's easy to get bogged down in trying to get involved in 5 or 6 new habits, and we don't want to overwhelm you. So if you find one thing that you can do and really commit to, you're going to make progress, and that's our goal. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that you learned something and had a good time too. Thank you.